Good morning. You know the game, Two Truths and a Lie? I thought I'd start by telling you three things about me. Two are true and one's a lie. I've dated a prince. The CIA tried to recruit me to be a clandestine agent. I'm allergic to eggplant. When I was growing up in Amman, Jordan, I found out that a prince, one of my classmates, wanted to date me. I'm still not sure why. I certainly wasn't interested in him, but his sister, now that's a different story. I wasn't interested in dating the prince, but I think this was going to be a problem. There's no way my protective Muslim parents were going to let me start dating. Well, apparently a different set of rules apply for princes, and I was not about to let the big secret of my sexuality out, so under pressure from my parents, I agreed to date him. The relationship lasted 43 days, an eternity in middle school. After that experience, I threw myself into sports because on the field and on the court, I could be myself. I could be a tomboy. I could have friends who were boys, not boyfriends. Sports was an escape, and with a lot of hard work, I excelled. By the time I was in high school, my teams were winning championships all over the Middle East and Europe. But as we were dominating the world, my own world was beginning to unravel. Some backstory may be helpful. I was born and raised in Jordan. My mom is Syrian, my dad is Jordanian, and I am Muslim, gay, and a refugee. In soccer, we call that a hat trick. I'm also the daughter and granddaughter of refugees. My grandmother fled Syria in 1964 during the first Assad regime. When she was 3 months pregnant, she packed up a suitcase, piled 5 kids in a car, and drove from Syria to Jordan, all with no idea of what the future would hold. At first, my grandfather was dismissive. He decided to stay. He didn't think things would get that bad. A month later, after his brothers were tortured and his factory was taken over by the government, he followed my grandmother to Jordan. They built new lives from scratch and eventually became independently wealthy Jordanian citizens. I was born 11 years later. It was very important to my grandmother to make sure that we knew our history and the journey of what our family had been through. So when I was 8 years old, she took me to see my first refugee camp. To this day, I remember that when she tried to send me off to play with the kids in the camp, I didn't want to do it. I thought those kids were nothing like me. But my grandmother knelt down beside me and said very firmly, "Go, and don't come back until you've played. Don't ever think that other people are beneath you or that you have nothing to learn from others." I never wanted to disappoint her, so I went, and I ended up having a great time playing soccer with the kids. When we were leaving, I said haram in Arabic, "Pour them." "Haram on us," my grandmother replied, using another meaning of the word, "Shame on us. Don't feel sorry for them, believe in them." It wasn't until years later that I would fully understand what that meant. Fast forward to high school and that period of time when my teams were taking over the world, just as mine was beginning to unravel. Saddam Hussein had just invaded Kuwait. I was on a summer vacation with my family when it happened, a summer vacation that was promptly cut short. And by the time school started up again, students were already being evacuated, embassies were starting to pull their non-essential employees out of Jordan, and I was saying goodbye to friend after friend after friend. The American school I attended turned into a ghost town. We started doing chemical weapons drills. Trying to regain some sense of normalcy, I went with a group of friends to visit the Dead Sea. We ended up running for shelter, hearing sirens going off and seeing Scud missiles flying over our heads. On top of all this, there was something else that was filling my life with fear and confusion. I'd always thought that I would eventually grow out of being a tomboy, but I didn't. I was struggling with my sexuality, knowing that my family, my country, and my faith would never accept me for who I really was. If they found out, I would be rejected, cast out, maybe killed. At one point, I even tried to kill myself. A few days after that, as I was trying to come out of the fog, I was talking to my grandmother, who was always my soft spot to land. And I asked her if, when Allah made me, had Allah made a mistake? It was the closest I ever got to telling her that I was gay. And I believe that she knew. It was unspoken. She had held me and told me that Allah did not make a mistake on me. Around that same time, I read an article in Time magazine about the tennis player Martina Navratilova. who'd sought asylum in the United States. My mind was blown right into the line. Perhaps her most lasting legacy is having lived as an open homosexual. Was that even possible? I started to feel a little better. There were other people out there like me. That was a reason to live. But if I was going to live, I knew that I would have to leave the home I knew and loved. College seemed like the solution. My high school resume read like a how-to guide to success. I was the captain of every team, the yearbook boss, the student council president. And I had my eyes set on going to college in the land of stars and stripes, which I did at Smith. Smith was where I met Misty. She was a burst of yellow hair and curves whose room was like a shrine to the color pink. I despised pink. But Misty's wild spirit and irreverent humor were magnetic. But in some ways, we had a lot in common. We were both kaleidoscopes of contradictions. She was a blue-collared kid from Maine who was the first in her family to go to college. When we met, she thought I was from a working-class background like her because I'd mentioned that my father worked in steel. I failed to mention that he owned the steel factories. Turns out my jackets were Armani, and I had a lot of conflicting traits too. A Muslim who didn't eat pork but did enjoy vodka, who never prayed but did fast for Ramadan, who loved women even though her faith preached otherwise. Misty and I were also both tough, like those weeds that spring up in the cracks of a sidewalk, growing up where they don't belong. Slowly over time, I started figuring out how to embrace that quality in myself. I started to shed a few of the layers of self-hatred that I'd been using like armor. It didn't happen overnight. Accepting others was a lot easier than accepting myself. Witnessing unconditional love between parents and their gay kids challenged everything I feared about my own family's acceptance. When I tried to join the Muslim Student Association at Smith, the group leader, Amina, quickly made it clear that I was not welcome. Apparently, people who weren't ready to accept me for who I was were all over the world, in Jordan and at Smith. On my winter trip home to Jordan, my family took us all to a pilgrimage to Mecca. This was my chance. I asked Allah as my hands touched the Kaaba to make me straight. I actually convinced myself that I was straight. And when I returned, I was feeling I was all shades of gray, and not in the fun way. In the start to withdraw, being too quiet, feeling checked out way. Misty suggested dance therapy. After all, if I was straight, she said, then dancing with girls shouldn't faze me. Spoiler alert, my straightness ended up lasting about as long as a chocolate bar at a kid's party. Years before Taylor Swift, Misty pulled me off the couch and showed me what shaking off looked like. When she invited me to go home with her to Maine, I felt like I was stepping into a live-action National Geographic special. Somewhere in the middle of peeling rhubarb pie and discussing Springer plot twists with Misty's grandmother, who was tougher than $2 steak, I had a realization. Something about seeing the no-nonsense, work hard, play hard life that Misty came from and the place she'd carved out for herself in the world made me think, what's stopping me? Maybe I could find my way too, mixing and matching the pieces of me, the Arab, the gay, the Muslim, into something 100% authentically me. The first step was figuring out how to stay in the U.S. after graduation. It was a real mental marathon. It made my brain sweat. I wasn't exactly rewriting the theory of relativity, so an Einstein visa was out. So was a work visa, probably, because I was an anthropology major. A green card marriage would mean a lot of paperwork and a lot less romance. But because the Attorney General at the time, Janet Reno, had given the green light for people like me to seek asylum in the United States, there was another option. And so during the spring of my senior year, as my classmates were finishing up applications to grad schools and going on job interviews, I was busy preparing for the asylum hearing that would determine whether or not I could remain in this country. I also had to take care of one more thing. I had to tell my parents that I was staying. When I called home, my brother answered the phone, wanting to know if I'd picked up the Nikes he wanted. Then my dad got on the phone. I told him my news in Arabic because some things are too big for a second language. He told me I was no longer his daughter. Then my mom jumped on the phone, her anger crackling like a bad radio, asking me if someone had been messing with my head. Then the line went dead, leaving me with a dial tone that sounded a lot like goodbye. Life comes at you fast. One minute I was planning a spring break trip, the next I was planning a life in exile. On the other hand, at least I didn't have to remember the Nikes for my brother. I lost my family, my home, and my country, but I gained my freedom. Because my future had been so uncertain, I hadn't been able to apply for jobs or grad schools during my senior year. So the next step was figuring out what to do with myself. Naturally, as a gay Arab Muslim woman, I decided to move to the South. A friend from Smith got me a job working for her aunt in North Carolina, Sarah Lee. Yes, that was her real name. Sarah Lee was 50% Blanche from the Golden Girls and 50% Julia Sugarbaker from Designing Women. In other words, she was 100% wonderful. I worked in her restaurant, and when I say that I worked, I worked. I washed dishes and waited tables and bussed and cooked and cleaned, and I loved every minute of it. It was a therapy that I needed to heal. I was accepted and valued, and I was part of a team. I was also worried that that feeling wouldn't last. Sarah Lee was a Southern Baptist. I didn't know what she would say when I came out to her, but I knew that I had to tell her the truth. So one day, as we were watching TV in her living room, I told her, "Miss Sarah, I'm gay." I will never forget her response. "That's fine, honey," she told me. "Just don't be a slut." Being accepted meant everything. This country gave me that. Smith gave me that. Miss Sarah gave me that. But as much as I love my new country, there was one opportunity to be a part of something that I knew just wasn't for me. I promised I would tell you the other truth from the two truths and a lie. The truth is that the CIA really did try to recruit me to work as a clandestine agent after 9/11. Even though I knew that that was not going to be my purpose in life, the attempted recruitment made me think about myself, my unique skill set and qualities a little differently. Being bicultural, bilingual, tough to read, having knowledge of different cultures and backgrounds, my interpersonal skills, these things were of value to the CIA. They had prepared me to make a contribution somewhere that only I could make, but I still needed to figure out what that looked like. So I clerked for a law firm, did web and graphic design, and opened my own cafe, but none of it felt right. Then one day, driving to my favorite Middle Eastern grocery store where I could get authentic hummus and pita bread, I took a wrong turn and ended up in the parking lot of a rundown apartment complex, where some kids were playing soccer using rocks for goals. A week later, I returned to that same parking lot armed with a soccer ball. One of the boys ran up to me and asked if they could use it, and I said yes, but only if they'd let me play. They were skeptical at first, but they really wanted the nicer ball. They got in a huddle, talked amongst themselves, and reluctantly let me into their game. We played for hours, and I continued to leave work early every afternoon so that I could play with them. Eventually, I asked if any of them had ever played on the soccer team. They said no. I said, "Would you like to?" Their response was a very loud yes. It took a fair bit of work, but eventually we formed a team. The Fugees was not your typical soccer team. Our players were from war-torn countries: Bosnia, Liberia, Sudan, Afghanistan. The players were all, as our name suggested, refugees. The Fugees started small, but as word spread from friend to friend, brother to sister, apartment complex to apartment complex, the team grew. Soon I had dozens of kids asking to join. What they wanted was familiar to me: to play soccer, to be part of a team, to be surrounded by others like them. Eventually, we grew from one team to 2 to 3. Belonging to a team made quiet kids loud. It made scared kids brave. It helped kids who'd armored themselves with anger open up and laugh and smile. That was what being on a team did for them. But at the same time, my players were spending a lot of their time outside of soccer in school, a space where the opposite was true. When I realized that many of my players couldn't read or write at 13 and 14, after some years in public school, I did what I thought any good coach would do. I started a school. Not surprisingly, starting a school was a lot harder than starting a soccer team, but it turned out that the lessons I'd learned in my own journey and as a soccer coach about family, community, home, and belonging had prepared me to do it. Just like with the soccer teams, we started out small and grew, from 6 kids and 1 teacher in a church basement to a network of schools across multiple states. And now I dedicate my life to creating schools that provide a longer, softer welcome mat for kids who are forced to leave their homes. So those are the two truths. I have dated a prince. The CIA did try to recruit me, and I'm allergic to mushrooms, not eggplant. If you'd told me 25 years ago that I'd one day give a TED Talk with almost 2 million views and become an expert in refugee education with a footprint in Georgia, Ohio, and Kentucky and growing, and write a book or two about it, I might have believed you. But never in my wildest dreams would I believe that my life story would be optioned for a scripted series starring Pamela Anderson. The Pamela Anderson part's a lie. Thank you.